Hello, welcome back to Red in the Face. This is episode 3. Thanks everyone for tuning in for the first couple episodes. Today's episode is going to be a sort of mix of those two. So in the first one, we talked about the Corbyn project and where the left should go next in the UK, and we talked about the UK government's response to the coronavirus. Today, we're going to be talking about both those things, but with regards to America.
This is Lord, this is upper. This is the oppressed, this is the oppressed, this is the exploited, this is the exploiter.
Hierarchies that exist in the family, hierarchies that exist in the school.
Is it right that so many people live in such poverty in a society surrounded by such riches? No, it obviously is not.
Because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions.
So we'll start by talking about Sanders and the Sanders campaign. Sanders seems to have galvanized and radicalized a section of the American population, largely young and largely working class. He's the first candidate, I believe, in America to call himself a socialist while running for president. So that's a positive. It's no longer such a dirty word over there. He put forward a progressive social democratic agenda, Medicare for all being his flagship policy. His campaign was run unlike any other presidential campaign. There were no super PACs. His average donation was $27, and I think he raised the most money out of any Democratic candidate in the end. Someone correct me if that's wrong, but I'm fairly sure that's right. Despite all this, the campaign failed, and Sanders eventually ended up endorsing the rapist Joe Biden. So if we start by talking about the campaign, maybe have a rundown of what happened in the 2020 campaign. Anyone want to come in on that? James?
The same thing happened that always happens to any sort of progressive leader of campaign in the US, in that it got shut down by the powers that be within America, whether that's the Democratic Party or the workings of the system as a whole. Sanders was essentially undermined by everyone, from the media to Liz Warren supporters. He was smeared at every opportunity he got. Some very, very basic policies like Medicare for all was sort of smeared as communistic socialism and all this sort of shit. Like, it's just insane the lengths that they went to screw him over. And in the meantime, a man who's barely there, to be honest, Joe Biden, of course, a man who's there in presence, but definitely not in spirit or mind or any sort of other capacity, managed to keep going up and up in the polls. I think that was largely due to his association with Barack Obama, who's still the sort of darling of the Democrats. He's seen as the ultimate in Democratic sort of circles as, what president should aspire to be. And that's about all that can be said for Joe Biden. He was once a vice president to a war criminal. As far as I'm concerned, that's it. But essentially, Bernie faltered at a lot of hurdles. He lost his first primary to Pete Buttigieg. Not really. It was obviously a farce in the sense that Pete Buttigieg, I think, owned stocks in the company that handled the electronic voting. There was a massive delay in getting the ballots. There was a lot of electronic interference that is just so sketchy. I remember being in class with you guys, and we were waiting for Jean Moorfield, big up Jean Moorfield, and she was talking about how it was basically rigged. Without saying the words rigged, because it always goes badly when you're like, oh, that's rigged. It sounds like some sort of conspiracy theory. But I think I can say with some certainty that it was rigged. And following that, it just got worse from there. He was smeared on Twitter. Liz Warren refused to hand out any endorsement until right at the end, until Bernie dropped out after Sanders started gaining in the polls. And I think it was Barack Obama in the end that finished him off. So we all dream of being finished off by Obama, really. I think it was Obama who had a conversation with him that caused him to drop out. I would love the minutes of that meeting. That'd be fantastic. But yeah, it was an average left campaign in America, in the sense that it was maligned at every turn and ultimately ended up failing.
I think, like you say, the real shame for people that were looking across the pond over to Bernie Sanders comes from that original Iowa caucus. So essentially, I mean, in America, to become the nominee for one of the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, you basically have to do an internal voting system. You go state to state, and the members, sort of, it's a bit different than in Britain, vote for you to become the nomination to go onto the presidential race. And the first one's in Iowa. It's in this really weird. Iowa's a weird system the way they vote. You don't just go in and cast a vote. You stand in groups of people, and then it's almost like it's the election equivalent of two people standing either side of the room to a dog and telling the dog to come here, and then you have to go towards your owner. And that's how the caucus works. And then whoever gets the most people go to them wins, and it's just completely screwed. But then to screw it again, I mean, that's an old system that's been in place. Screw it again, the Democrats obviously had this new voting system in which it was all done by via sort of the votes were cast and counted through an app. Like, James references there, it turns out that this app had links to Pete Buttigieg. One of its co-founders was a Hillary Clinton staffer. All of these things that, like, from the very, very start, even though Sanders, after Iowa, started picking up some big results and picking up a bit of momentum, and it looked like he could do something, from the very start, I think a lot of people knew that it was going to happen again. It was going to be something untoward was going to happen, as happened last time he tried to become the nominee, because the Democratic Party can't possibly have someone that even takes them slightly further away from what they perceive as like an American political norm. And it's a real shame because, like you say, there was those. He lost in the storm of the app news cycle and all the talk of this mess, and Donald Trump tweeting that the Democrats can't even do a primary. They can't even do a vote. Never mind run the country. I think Sanders lost a lot of momentum, even though he started to pick it up again. Like I say, the die was cast really then that he just wasn't going to be allowed to win.
Yeah. So essentially, Sanders, one of the most radical Democratic candidates for president in history, comparable to Corbyn in the UK, started off very well. Looked like he was the front runner for a while against, how many, I don't know, tens of moderate Democratic candidates. Started off really well, and then the campaign slowly started to, not even slowly actually, it was quite quickly, started to derail, largely because of a lot of fuckery and a lot of games played on behalf of the Democratic Party establishment. Like you said about Iowa, there was a lot of dodgy shit going on in Iowa, but the final blow, really, when people knew, not the final blow, but people knew it was over, just before Super Tuesday, all the moderate candidates other than Biden dropped out, didn't they? And they all fell in line and endured, including Pete Buttigieg, who had been outside of Biden and Sanders was kind of one of the most hyped up candidates. Yeah, so including him and a bunch of others dropped out and endorsed Biden because they knew that Bernie had a real chance of winning if they didn't. And Super Tuesday being the most important day in the presidential race in America, it's when how many, I don't know, like eight states vote or something like that. But basically like a big chunk of states vote on that day, because in America they do it really weird. They separate, and I think it's like really anti-democratic actually. They separate all of the voting days, don't they? Which means that you can end up voting differently depending on what has happened on previous days in previous states, because you vote like tactically based on that. So it's not very democratic.
California might not vote for the same set of candidates that Iowa do, and like you say, it's the race itself will influence the way you vote. I mean, if you think Bernie hasn't got a chance, or you think, everyone's falling in behind, that's why all these candidates falling in behind Biden is so important. Because if you're there and you haven't voted yet, and then all these candidates drop out and go, I'm supporting Biden, it's like, well, yeah, maybe we should, a bit of unity. We're up against this awful person in Donald Trump. We've just got to get the person that can unify people. And that obviously influences it. And it also had a role in, when was the last primary? 2016? 2016, the last one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it played a role in 2016 because what the Democratic Party did, they front-loaded a load of states that they knew Hillary would do well in. Obviously, an anti-establishment candidate, in Bernie Sanders, anti-establishment in terms of the Democratic Party, being an independent his whole life, means that you need a bit of forward momentum. What they did in 2016 was front-loaded a load of states where they knew Hillary Clinton was going to do really well. So she just got a momentum that was nearly impossible for Bernie Sanders to catch up again. So this idea of where the states lie is very important, and the Democratic Party are the ones that decide where these states go, and it all ties into the fact they just they weren't going to let him win.
Since we're talking about the party actively sabotaging Sanders, I think it's also important to recognize that he's not in the Democratic Party. He's an independent senator from Vermont, and he's by no means the first presidential candidate to call himself a socialist. But as far as I understand, he's the first Democratic candidate or potential Democratic candidate to call himself a socialist.
So a serious contender. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of people here and there who have ran and been radical.
Shout out to Eugene Debs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was gonna say I think Eugene Debs probably had. I'd say he got closer to power than Bernie Sanders did, to be honest.
What was he run? Did he run as an independent, or was it like the American?
I think it was. I want to say the American Party of Labor, but we'll correct that when it's wrong because I'm not sure about that. But it was a socialist political organization. Did
he beat either the Democratic or the Republican nominee then, or?
Well, no, but neither did Sanders.
No.
I mean, Sanders didn't even get to become candidate. That's what I'm saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in the vote count, did he finish above either of them?
I don't know. I mean, he ran for president 5 times.
And if Sanders had won the Democratic nomination, he probably would have won the election as well.
Yeah, probably. And I think that's why Sanders is choosing to go through the Democratic parties, because the US is a two-party system. It's a two-party system, and the parties are pretty much indistinguishable from one another. He had no real choice other than to go through the Democratic Party, and even then he got fucked.
It's what Thomas Sankara said, isn't it? It's like, America is a one-party state, but with typical American extravagance, they divide it into two or something, like the Reds and the Blues.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was Sankara, but maybe it was. I don't know. I think I don't know. It was definitely someone, but it's a solid point. The US
someone said it.
It's a one-party state, and they have two parties that essentially serve the same purpose. And the fact that they won't let someone as remotely left-wing as Sanders into any sort of position of power is quite telling of how committed America is to maintaining capitalism.
Do we think there's a reason that, like we said, Sanders obviously had that early momentum, and then once people started to find, like I referenced, people fall in line behind Joe Biden and up against this sort of scary thing that is Trump, maybe people thought, this candidate that seems to be unifying the Democratic vote might be better. Is there a reason why people started to vote for? Because I think Biden might have been 4th in Iowa and New Hampshire. It looked like after maybe 4 states that Joe Biden was going to drop out after being big, getting the biggest donations, after obviously probably the most popular candidate, most well-known name other than Sanders. And it looked like so early he was going to drop out. Then out of nowhere, he was able to pick up all the support. Do you think there's a reason why people decided to vote for him?
I think it's this idea that the American public have of sort of performative resistance, #resistance, where they essentially take milquetoast politics, such as Nancy Pelosi ripping up one of Trump's speech, and sort of proclaim it to be, this is the answer to Trump. Trump is Lord Voldemort, and Biden's a Gryffindor, and they take this whole idea of the bare. I mean, I wouldn't even say the bare minimum. I don't even qualify as the bare minimum. Biden as a progressive, and I use very, very fat air quotes around the word progressive. I think it's this idea that they're sold on constantly through the Twitterati, the blue ticks that post #resist, Biden 2020, he's going to beat Trump and all this stuff. And I think it just comes from that. I think it was spurred on by a lot of the media actually worrying that Sanders could do something, thinking, oh, this harms my interest, therefore we have to adjust the news accordingly. It's classic manufacturing concern.
I think that's probably the case about the performative politics you're talking about. That's probably the case for like upper middle class, like liberal white Americans. I mean, Biden gets a lot of the, talking about why Biden got so many votes, he gets a large part of the black vote, doesn't he? The black Democratic vote, because I don't know if it's just because of the association with Obama, but I know that's a large part of it. So I think that's a large part of his voting base. And the other thing is like just being recognizable. I think Americans like someone who they recognize, and someone who's been in an office of power before is appealing to them. And the whole idea that Sanders just breaks from the norm, so much. So Biden's the alternative. But if it's not Sanders, it's Biden. Then do you know what I mean? So but Sanders was a threat to people and blah blah blah.
I would say the black vote's quite an interesting thing, because actually what I did for my undergrad dissertation, why did Clinton beat Bernie to the black vote in 2016? And she was winning some states. I think amongst black women, she was winning some states at 90% vote, like ridiculous amounts. And I thought that this time, at the start of the campaign, Bernie's African American outreach looks brilliant. Like he was hitting a lot of the things that he didn't do last time. He got there were protests. There was a protest at one of his rallies by Black Lives Matter, and he absolutely screwed it in 2016. Whereas this time, he really felt like he understood where he'd gone wrong. But the voting shows that a lot of the black voters still went with Biden. And I don't know if, from my research last time, there's a strong sense of there's a feeling amongst some of the African American community that almost choosing the candidate, your ideal candidate, is actually like almost, that's a sign of your privilege. You've just got to choose somebody who's most likely to win, most likely to get in, and most likely to make like some marginal gains for you. Having someone that tells you everything you want but isn't going to get in or change anything, because you're like the impractical candidate, that's not going to help you that much if they just have a great sort of resurgent campaign but they don't get in to change anything. So sometimes there's this idea that, just because you've got to get rid of Trump, who's this horrible racist, I know Joe Biden's got this terrible history as well, is that you sort of have to just go with the establishment candidate just to make sure they get in. So I don't know if that's got something to play to it, but it's disappointing. Yeah, lesser evil, because you're so downtrodden that you just you just go for the person that people tell you is electable. I don't know if that played a role this time, but it's interesting that 2 times in a row Bernie Sanders was unable to really galvanise the African American vote.
If that's the case, then it's a shame, because it shows a lack of political education, because Biden wasn't likely at any stage to beat Trump. I think Trump was beating him consistently in polls for like a couple of years leading up to the primaries, whereas Sanders, the opposite is true. Sanders is, I think one thing, talking about who's voting for Biden, stuff like that, I think one thing that's clear is I don't think working class people are out there, cheering for Joe Biden. He's not exactly got their interests at heart. And I think in America, just the Democratic Party in general isn't anywhere near as working class based as the Labour Party over here has historically been, although people talk about the red wall falling or whatever. But it hasn't got that connection over in America because they don't have the links to the unions, do they? They've never had ties to Labour unions. The so-called party of the left in America has never had that tie. So I think that's like an important distinction between Labour and the Democrats, and it shows itself in a lot of the policy that comes out and a lot of the candidates that get chosen, like Biden. Like, since when is Biden a champion of working class interests in any world? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's important to draw that parallel as well, because obviously I'm not a massive fan of Labour, but they do have links to the working class, and they do have a strong history of links to trade unions. But in the US, the parties, until the 60s, the Democrats were the party of racist plantation owners, whilst the Republicans were the party of big business owners based in industrial areas. So each party represented a segment of the capitalist class. It's just that it was plantation owners versus big business owners, as opposed to working class versus capitalists. And I don't think the Democrats have. I mean, I'm not saying they represent racist plantation owners, but they haven't changed their nature of representing capitalist interests. There's no pretense of representing the working class. I mean, Biden is. I mean, he's not officially the nominee still, but he's the de facto nominee, and he's got pretty shit policies. He's not advocating for Medicare for all. He's not advocating for slashing the military budget. He's not advocating for free education like Sanders was. And Sanders wasn't even that radical. Like, in the context of US politics, I suppose Sanders was a radical. But to pretty much any other country in the world, Sanders is just like the most mild politician. And he had so little going for him if you take him in sort of a global context. It's only in the specific context of the US, which is this amazingly capitalistic hellscape, that Sanders really had any sort of appeal.
Do we want to talk about that, about how radical Sanders really was, and compare him to Corbyn or just the left in Europe in general? Because a lot of people say, if Sanders was over here, he'd be like a centrist. He'd be like on the right of the Labour Party or whatever. I don't know. Do you remember that actually during the primary campaign? A lot of right-wing Labour figures were trying to sort of claim Sanders as their own. A lot did the opposite actually. A lot of them hated him, but some of them were trying to sort of claim him. Oh, if he was over here, he'd be Progress or Labour First or one of these groups. Which, if you directly translate policies, Sanders would be a Tory, probably like a right-leaning Tory. If you don't, it doesn't work like that, does it? You have to look at context. I just mean because that seems like an absurd statement to make, but if you look at just what he's advocating for, Medicare for all, so a nationalized healthcare system, or is it even a nationalized? Is it just like a guaranteed insurance system? I don't know. I'm not sure how the intricacies of that work. But basically, so that wouldn't be radical over here. But is that fair to translate it directly like that, or do you basically what do you think of Sanders? Anyone who wants to comment on it? What do you think of Sanders and his so-called radicalism?
I think sometimes there's a bit of a I don't want to call it snobbery. I just think it's hard because we're not in that context of growing up in America. I think there's going to be a lot of young left-wing people who are going to end up being a lot more left-wing than Sanders' positions on several policies, because as a result of getting radicalised by the Sanders campaign, the same way as we as Corbyn, I think we will be, what our politics are now, or mine are, to the left of what Corbyn was offering as a result of being radicalised by Corbyn. So I think it's quite difficult to sort of just say, yeah, I mean, some of the things he was advocating weren't wildly radical on a global scale, but some of the things were. I mean, Labour didn't talk about legalisation of marijuana. They certainly didn't talk about anybody that had a...
Corbyn talks quite a lot about legalising marijuana.
Wasn't it? Didn't make it into a manifesto though. That was a key. It was a key Bernie Sanders pledge, on top of the fact that if you had any previous arrests or convictions based off the possession of, dealing of marijuana, that all of those would be pardoned, which obviously for the African American community in particular would have been like absolutely massive. Like, that's quite a radical. That's better than what that's better than what we were offering. I think there's elements, but I mean, like Harley said, it's the hellscape of America. Like it is hard, and he was running for a position in a party that is, traditionally funded by big pharma and funded by billionaires. And Michael Bloomberg, he was on a stage with someone that was a Republican 10 years ago. So I do get it's difficult. I know we talked about this in the first episode about sort of sticking to your principles, but I think he was radical, in the context or not, and I think he is a radical. But yeah, it is hard. It's hard to make this comparison.
Let me clarify. I wasn't saying that I'm saying that some people would make that argument that you should directly translate his politics to a British or European context. I'm saying you shouldn't. I agree with you. You shouldn't. And I think in terms of America, he is massively radical. Although I do think there are certain things that in any context, you should be able to criticize him on, and particularly his record on foreign policy. There's some really dodgy stuff. I mean, I've heard things like criticisms of his foreign policy throughout both campaigns. People were pissed off about it, but I never really looked into the detail, partly because I guess I probably didn't want to know, because like it's upsetting the guy that you're supporting reading that he voted for this, that, and the other. But he has got some dodgy records. Does anyone want to talk a bit about that, about his record on foreign policy?
I mean, I think the biggest criticism of his foreign policy, at least that I've heard, would be that, yeah, he opposed the Iraq War, but then he authorized massive military budgets for the continuation of the Iraq War. And this was in 2004, 2005. I think they authorized new military budgets every year. So it's not like he was unaware that the Iraq War was happening. He was authorizing military budgets whilst this was happening. And he could have simply voted not to. And obviously, voting not to, it's not going to change things. The US at the time was very much going all in on the Iraq War. So it's not like his vote would have changed anything, but I think it says a lot about his positions personally that he was willing to vote in favor of these military budgets of epic proportions in order to continue the US war in Iraq. And then also in the 90s, it's sort of a hot topic on the left, I guess, because it's not exactly clear-cut what was going on in Yugoslavia, but he voted for NATO bombings of Yugoslavia in 98, I think, and also in 99. And there's an argument there, because it's the argument that was made by the US and Western powers at the time, is that it was in the prevention of genocide. And that's certainly not the position that Russia and Serbia took up on the issue. And I don't know enough to speak coherently about it, but it's certainly something that's been quite heavily criticized by the left, is the way that NATO conducted itself in the Yugoslav wars of the late 90s. And a lot of unnecessary civilian deaths occurred. But again, I don't know enough to say whether or not there was a legitimate risk of genocide occurring. So I won't speak too much about it, but that is something that people have criticized Sanders for.
Yeah, I was reading like about exactly what you're talking about. Some of the votes about when you were talking about he apparently opposed the initiation of the Iraq War, but then voted for its continuation in various acts or like through Congress or whatever, bills through Congress. And apparently even when he opposed it, the reason that he opposed it was because he was worried about weakening US imperial power. So in the House, he said, I guess it's just part of some debate, he said, I agree with Brent Scowcroft, Republican former National Security Advisor for President George Bush Sr., who stated, an attack on Iraq at this time would seriously jeopardize, if not destroy, the global counter-terrorist campaign we have undertaken. So it's a little bit worrying that his concerns when opposing the Iraq War were more about, weakening. He was worried about weakening US imperial power rather than the opposite.
I think that's the thing about why you can't directly translate Sanders to Corbyn or British politics. It's because, at the end of the day, he is still an American politician. And it's so deeply ingrained, the American hegemony within lawmakers in America, that it's not directly comparable. I think, as Dan rightly says, it's a product. Sanders is a product of, and the Sanders campaign is a product of the environment of America. Mass incarceration rates based on marijuana run by private companies. 100% you have to rally against that. But I feel like that is literally the bare minimum you can do, is to put right some of the domestic injustices. I don't think you'll ever get a candidate that goes against the imperial nature of what has, become the American empire since 1940. Because it would be, one, it would be political suicide. And two, I just think it's so deeply ingrained within candidates, all candidates. Obviously you'll get some real progressives, like real lefties who do want to change it, but I can't see any mainstream, and I include Sanders in the mainstream. I would say he's just about mainstream. He agrees with a lot of the mainstream policies. I just can't see anyone campaigning on a platform of anti-American imperialism.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Just clarify again. I'm not saying that I wouldn't vote for Sanders. I like the guy. I would have voted for him. He's definitely a radical in the American context. I'm just sort of bringing up some of the reasons that he's, even if you put it in American context, he has some issues as a candidate, basically.
James said then that if you went up against the sort of the machine of Americans' foreign policy and sort of spoke up against it, that you'd get, you know, DOA as a candidate. That would be it, because it's so ingrained in the psyche. You'd only appeal to sort of a certain sect. Does that mean then, going into the wider discussion, that therefore there's no point engaging with the democratic nomination process, because even if, as a nominee, you're going to get slaughtered anyway? I mean, it's the same conversation we have in the episode 1 about the British context. You know, is there a point to parliamentary politics? Is there a point to socialists engaging with the Democratic Party? Because running a socialist campaign within that, it looks like you're either going to get stopped from becoming the nominee due to institutional reasons. You know, the Democratic establishment want to stop you, or the media are going to absolutely slaughter you left, right, and centre, both liberal media, you know, air quotes, and right wing media. So what do socialists do in America?
I'm not a Democrat either. I'm a nihilist.
Well, I don't want to advocate for armed insurrection on the podcast.
Why not?
I'll do it unofficially. You know, if any of the listeners want to come to a pub and debate this further, I'll be happy to tell you about, you know, the.
That sounds illegal. Assembly for fucking.
Yeah, perhaps.
Organising.
I mean, if anyone people, it also makes me sound like I'm desperate for friends. Please come and meet me. I'll do a podcast. No, but I would say, I mean, fucking why not vote? Like, you might as well vote. But I wouldn't vote for Biden. Like, spoil your ballot, write in because, you know, America has third party right. You can write in a candidate you want. Same with Egypt. You know, Mo Salah, the Liverpool winger, I think he came like second or third place in the Egyptian elections. Do something like that. I mean, I wouldn't write Bernie. And someone like Howie Hawkins, he's not perfect, but, you know, the Green candidate for America, that is. Someone like that. It literally doesn't matter. Write in whoever you want. Write in your dad. Write in yourself. Like, do something to. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of the American participatory democracy system because it's obviously rigged. But you've got the right to vote. You might as well do something with it.
But the devil's advocate view is, in terms of, it's going to be Biden's nominee. The devil advocate sort of thing would be to say, okay, well, yeah. That's one thing, but if you do that, you allow someone to win in Donald Trump, who is, I know Biden's got a lot of these traits, who is admitted that he sexually assaults women, that he is a racist. His policies have been horrific from the start, and has been, he's been the. I don't know what the word is, but he started the fire amongst this. Maybe he didn't start the fire, but he's very much this reactionary turn.
Billy Joel fan.
He's an alt-right turn. This alt-right turn. He's, with the blood and soil marches have happened in South Carolina if Trump wasn't president. Example. I mean, that's what they'd say. That's who you're allowing to get in if you don't vote for Biden. I mean, I don't agree with that. But
what have you got to lose between either, the red rapist winning or the blue rapist winning? One of them's going to win. That's just how the American system works. You might as well spoil your ballot. Like, why contribute to either one of them winning? I wouldn't say in voting for Biden you're actively stopping Trump, because he's going to win. Like, let's be honest about it. I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Trump is going to win the election by their actions. The Democrats have chosen their lesser of two evils. Sanders was, I think, in many ways, he was the bigger evil to a lot of Democrats. Why not? Why not spoil your ballot? Why not vote for a third party?
And I agree with that, because I think as much as Trump says, what Trump does is says the quiet bit out loud. So he says Obama, I'm pretty sure on record still, Obama deported more people than any other president in history.
He also started the cages on the border. That's not a Trump thing.
Yeah,
that wasn't an Obama
exactly.
thing.
Black Lives Matter started under Obama. All of these things because he was a very good politician. Trump's a good politician in his own way, but what Trump does is says the quiet bit out loud, the racist bits you shouldn't say. And the problem is that Biden has many of the same views on how the world works and Trump does. He just doesn't say it out loud. For example, Biden told his billionaire donors at a New York campaign gathering that nothing would fundamentally change if he was president. So all these 4 years of him talking about this apocalyptic landscape that is Trump America, he goes and tells his billionaire donors in terms of wealth inequality, in a country where Jeff Bezos is about to make his first $1 trillion, in a country where people in Flint, Michigan can't get access to clean drinking water, you've got the first trillionaire, and Biden's going and telling his campaign donors nothing will fundamentally change. And that's the problem, is that he just doesn't deserve these people that work for Sanders, however radical he is, whatever we think, who were trying to get people free healthcare, who were, trying to at least start talking about righting some historical wrongs that have gone on in American society. He's not going to do all of them, but I don't think Biden's done anywhere near enough to deserve that vote. And by voting for him, nothing will change. By voting for Clinton, nothing changed. We've gone Obama, Clinton, Biden. They're all from the political wing.
I have to go in there. I fundamentally disagree with you saying that if you vote Clinton, nothing will change. That's a lie, because we'll have the first female war criminal, the first female presidential war criminal. Yeah.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. The argument about the lesser of two evils is one that comes up a lot, especially in British and American politics, because we're always having to choose between the two, usually at least. I think it's a bit more complex. So let's start with this. Do you guys think? I'll start by saying I wouldn't vote for Biden. In any circumstances, I wouldn't. I just wouldn't be able to bring myself to do it, just because he's so far removed from anything I believe. But let's start by asking that. I can see why people make the argument that you should. People on the far left making the argument that you should, because I have seen a few. Do you think, removing emotion from it completely, do you think that a Biden presidency would be in any way better than a Trump presidency?
It wouldn't
in any way,
differ.
just factually. Do you think
it would not differ? Nothing would change except the headlines and people on Reddit being like, "Haha, Biden's look what he's done now," and he inevitably shits himself at the fucking desk or something.
What about just factually? Do you think there would be no different? Like, in terms of policy, do you think the exact same policy program is going to go ahead under?
Yeah.
Economically, 100%. But for example, right, you've got Obama's cabinet, right? It had people from Lehman Brothers. It had people that are now PR and policy advisors for Amazon. It's the same revolving door. Trump.
But let's talk about policy, though. What about policy?
They are the policies, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at the policies are obviously different. So is Obamacare better than no Obamacare, for example? Is it better? Just on a factual point, is it better than no Obamacare?
Definitely.
I mean, that depends on how you feel, doesn't it?
Biden said he would appoint Republicans to cabinet. They're the people that are going to be fundamentally informing the policies that get made.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think the difference is marginal, but I think there is. I mean, I don't know Biden's policy plan completely, but I know that he would make some minor improvements in terms of healthcare, in terms of the environment, just sort of reversing some of it. It would make no difference in the long run. It makes no difference. I agree. But if you're and I wouldn't vote for Biden. I hate the guy. But if you're someone who believes that even the smallest difference, even if you show up on this one day, let's say you're sitting there on election day and you go, I can either, and let's say you had the decision, like you had the vote that weighs it one way or the other. You had the vote. You knew that you had the vote that wins Biden the presidency or loses it. I think there is a principled argument to be made there where you say, obviously this is a hypothetical, that situation doesn't exist, but I think there is some principled argument to be made there that you can say, well, I'm not making anything better by not doing it, and I might be making something the tiniest bit better by doing it. And I think along those lines, you can make a principled argument for voting for him. I
Yeah,
wouldn't.
but I mean, again, it's a thought
It
experiment.
would it'd be more helpful if I knew his policy program in more detail, because then I could talk about the differences. I don't know.
It's like the trolley problem. We could be using it all we want. We could say, oh, this is
Yeah, that's what I mean.
stuff. Basically, well, it doesn't matter. You're basically voting whether you prefer the colour red or blue, as far as I'm concerned.
I think you're hypothetical, though. That what I would say is that Biden can still, as part of his policy program, win over people from the left. My idea is what he's shown so far, he doesn't deviate enough from the narrow the narrow view of what is accepted in American politics. And if he were to come out and say, look, I am for universal healthcare in which everybody has the right to healthcare, then what I would say is I would vote for Biden then and say, right, what the left and Bernie Sanders campaign has done, we are proven that we can push the Democrats into making decisions and standing on policy platforms that they don't fundamentally agree with. If he could prove to me that our strategy of pushing the Democrats to the left works, I'll vote for him as that's us proven. And now every time we want a policy, when we want to abolish ICE, when we want to do whatever, we know we can push the Democrats to the left. Biden at the minute hasn't conceded anything to the left, and therefore I don't see how that makes. I actually think withdrawing our vote and saying, unless you give us healthcare, we will not vote for you, that's more powerful than actually voting for him, because him getting in, he's admitted nothing will fundamentally change.
I agree. I actually think you should. I completely agree with you. I think you should punish the Democratic Party for not shifting policy in light of all the Bernie Sanders movement and the rise of the radical left in America. I think you should punish the Democratic establishment by not voting for him. But I can see if you're someone who thinks in terms of, like I said, that's why it's like a philosophical thing or a moral argument. If you're someone who thinks I'm going to make let's say one person's, like, I'm going to get one more person easy access to healthcare by voting for Biden, then I'll do it. Then I can see why you would make that argument. I would just say that in the long run, it's more important that you don't vote for him, because you show the Democratic establishment that you're not just going to fall in line whenever they fuck over your candidate.
So in terms of, if we're saying that we sound like we broadly agree that we wouldn't vote for Biden unless he could, I mean, my viewpoint, I'm not saying this is all of ours, my viewpoint would be unless he can concede a hell of a lot to the left, with that main plank being universal healthcare. I mean, there's a million and one things. But if we're in that hypothetical and it was universal healthcare or not universal healthcare, I'd definitely go for it. I know all the other shit that comes with it, American imperialism, fucking mass incarceration. That's not getting fixed, but at least the one thing is, you know what I mean? Okay, so we're not going to vote for Biden. Does that mean that we shouldn't engage with the Democratic Party as socialists at all? Do we think if we can't push the Democratic, I mean, I think the left it's gone to the left a little bit. At least universal healthcare is on the agenda now because of Bernie a little bit. Is there any point of engaging with the Democratic presidential process, do we think?
No, because, we're still talking entirely in hypotheticals. Yes, in an ideal world, 100%, but we're not in an ideal world. We're in hell world. As far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty sure I died about 4 years ago. And this is purgatory for all the horrible sins I committed, or something. We're not in the ideal world, We have to face reality, and the reality is, Joe Biden is just as bad as Donald Trump. I don't think, the problem with lesser evil voting is we're faced with two evils. That shouldn't be the point. The point shouldn't be to elect the best evil. The point should be you need a system that isn't going to include evil at all. And I know we don't. I know that's idealistic, that's utopian, but I just could not see myself voting for either one in this election.
But that's fine, because we're all saying that. But what I'm saying is that does that mean then therefore there's no point engaging with the Democratic Party because it will only create evil? Like
in my opinion, yeah. The Democrats and Republicans are essentially just one party with different colours.
I I think that you should. I'm currently of the opinion, and this might change. This is the kind of thing that I'm thinking about a lot recently, and I'm not completely sure where I stand on it. But currently, I'm of the opinion that you should engage in electoral politics to a certain extent alongside anything else that you want to be a part of, or any kind of community building or movement building, anything like that. I think you should engage in electoral politics alongside that. So, for example, and this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, if you're in America and you're on the left and you're thinking about not showing up to vote, the president, as far as I know, I'm not an expert on the American political system, but as far as I know, you don't just vote for the president in November. They have this thing called, they call it down ballot or something, I think, which is like all the other votes. So the congressional elections, governors, shit. I don't know if that's all on the same day, but I know the congressional stuff definitely is. And there's a good lot of socialists in those races. There's the most famous of which is that, what's his name, Joshua. I think it's Joshua. Am I getting something wrong? Josh, is it Col? I think I could be getting his name wrong. But there's a bunch of candidates that are very much on the left, some of which to the left of Bernie Sanders, who are running for different positions other than the president. So I think you should engage in that no matter what you think of electoral politics, because I don't think it undermines whatever else you want to do or want to build politically. And I think the Biden thing is different because the presidential election, I know I was just making the sort of the point that I think you can make a principled decision to vote for Biden. I still wouldn't, and I think that's different because you're voting for a guy who is literally responsible for some real fucking bad shit. He was vice president when America bombed the shit out of Libya, for example. Is responsible for the poor reaction to the 2008 financial crash, with all of which was done, under Obama or whatever. So I think it's different then, but I think you should still engage at least at the local level and maybe the congressional level, because there are some decent people who are, a part of that.
I think there's a big difference to be made between what Dan's talking about, which is talking about working within the Democratic Party to try and make changes, and what you're talking about, Morgan, which is working within electoral politics as a whole. So if you're trying to work within the Democratic Party and you're a socialist, you may as well not fucking bother. If someone like Sanders can't even get the nomination, then there's not much point working through the Democratic Party on a socialist platform. But what you're saying, Morgan, is that on the local level, there are people who are actually running on socialist policies who you could elect for your regional governor, for example.
There are lots of Democrats.
Yeah, if
that is working within the Democratic Party. Like,
if you are somewhere where that is the case and you have someone who is advocating for those policies, then sure, vote for them. But you have to recognize that because they're in the Democratic Party, these people are constrained. They can't become genuinely socialists. They can only at best become social democrats and advocate social welfare policies. And there are people who are working outside the Democratic Party that are socialists putting themselves on the ballot. So if you're in a situation where you could vote for a local governor who is an actual socialist, whether or not they're within the Democratic Party, it's my view that, yeah, you should vote for them, but you shouldn't vest your hopes on the Democratic Party and the Democratic establishment as a whole. So I think ultimately what we have to recognize is that the president of the United States is never going to be a socialist. The US will fucking die before the US has a socialist president. And to be honest, I'm hyped for the death of America. But if you're somewhere where at the local level you can elect a socialist, then you should go out and do it. But you shouldn't work within the Democratic Party as a whole to try and bring forward a platform of change, because it's not going to work.
I think there's certainly a case, and it's particularly, this is important for America and isn't really comparable for Britain, is there's a sense in the American left that you can sort of have an electoral strategy of sort of horses for courses, in the fact that in some areas you can do A, some areas you can do B, some areas you can do C, in the fact that they have open primaries over there, which we talked about in the first episode. If you want to become a Democratic candidate, you just have to say, I am a Democrat, and then you go up against a vote against other people that are Democratic candidates, and you can win. And that has to happen to everybody. So even if you're currently the elected representative for that area, you have to go into that system. If for example, that a couple of socialists have done, they can, get a good campaign and get in. That's great, because when you then come to the general election, you're more likely to win with Democrat next to your name than independent. But like Harley says, in some areas, if you can't do that because the establishment there is so entrenched, then being a third party socialist also has its benefits. So I think in America, which you can't do here because you're not going to win you're not going to have a selection meeting for a Labour Party candidate anyway. You can pick and choose where you want to sort of take on the Democrats electorally, I think, which is something you just can't do here.
The name was Joshua Collins. I was right. He's like the most well-known sort of socialist candidate running for Congress this time around in November. And just as I was trying to look up his name to confirm that was the guy I was thinking of, and just when I was looking up on Twitter, he's just submitted his, like a matter of hours ago, submitted his candidacy papers, and he's running under the newly formed Essential Workers Party rather than the Democratic Party, which he'd said that he was going to run as a Democrat, and now he's running as the Essential Workers Party. I'm not sure what that is. It's obviously some new thing to do with coronavirus, but it's funny because I was just trying to say to Harley, "Oh no, they're Democrats," and no, this guy isn't a Democrat, at least not anymore.
But that's what I mean, though. That in America, they can sort of pick and choose where they dip into electoral politics. I think they're going to have the same problems that we've had. That if all these people that have been energized by the Bernie campaign, all those inspiring stories you saw people going all the way over to Iowa to go and campaign and stuff like that. If they put all of their energy into fighting in the Democratic Party, movement will get burnt out and die very quickly. However, if they pick their battles between backing certain candidates in primaries, for example, and I think Labour should do this, don't back the Democrats. If you're a Bernie candidate or you're a socialist, don't back the Democrats just because they're Democrats. Pick them because they have policy platforms that you agree with. And I think that with Labour, stop going and campaigning in seats going, oh yeah, but it is a Labour MP. But it's a Labour right MP. So don't campaign for them. Same with Democrats. If they don't advocate free healthcare, if they don't advocate abolishing ICE, if they don't advocate no deportations, if they don't advocate, a non-interventionist foreign policy, just say, well, I'm not going to support you then. I'm going to support that guy in the state nearby. I think that's what both the American and the UK left need to do. Is not just, we've been proven you can't trust these establishments that are the Democratic Party and the Labour Party. So pick the candidates that you like and you think have the platform that you want to see you want to see put on the big stage. Sorry, big word for me. And back them. Don't just back people because they're Democrats.
And what we have done is the reason why most of the world is repaired to us, particularly after World War II, is because of who we are as a nation. We, the people, we hold these truths, etc.
Right. So we just talked a bit about Biden and why you should or shouldn't vote for him. I think it came across a bit like I was saying you should vote for him. You shouldn't. The guy's a rapist and a paedophile, so you shouldn't vote for him. And he's as right wing as they come for a Democrat. But the worst. Should we talk a bit about why you shouldn't vote for him? Because we do all agree that you shouldn't vote for him. So we'll talk a little bit about his history, the policies that he's carrying forward to this campaign, the allegations against him, some of the dodgier stuff that he's been accused of and involved in.
In terms of policies, you can't get a better argument for why he's just everything that he's offering is so vanilla than actually just going to the Joe's Vision for America part of the Biden president website, because it's all just it's awful. It's all small policy fixes. It's all about very much playing with the margins, and it goes back to what he told his billionaire campaign donors. Nothing will fundamentally change. He's not looking to rebalance the American economy. He's not looking to right any wrongs against African Americans. He's not looking to do any of that. He's looking to play around with the margins. He's talking about his grand vision for Black America, it says that he's means testing free college tuition for families earning under a certain amount, and that he's going to improve certain types of tax credits. It's like, well, that doesn't even touch the surface of the issue. But yeah, it goes back to he said nothing will fundamentally change, and it sounds like nothing will.
So one thing you have to remember about Joe Biden is this is the same Joe Biden that in 1977 said that desegregation policies would cause his children to grow up in a racial jungle. The man fought for pro-segregation causes. I mean, well, he fought for segregation, essentially.
The buses, like, Senator was awful. The stuff with the busing is, research it if you can, people, because it's terrible.
I think this goes to something that you've said before, James, not in the podcast, in that they chose Joe Biden because he was sort of he's sort of bridged the gap. They chose him as vice president because he bridges the gap between the Democrats that Obama represents and the Democrats of the 60s who are just racist, who are just a bunch of racists, to put it bluntly. And I think that's the reason. I agree with you that is the reason that Joe Biden was ever in this position of vice president. It's not because he was an exceptional politician or anything like that. It's because while Obama could appeal to a younger demographic and appeal to the African American community, Joe Biden does not have those credentials. He's just got straight up racism. He doesn't have anything to offer Black Americans. He's just got a racist ass fuck history, and I can't possibly imagine that he's changed those positions in the past 10 years.
I mean, he's just not a Gryffindor.
He's totally a Slytherin, for sure. Yeah, I agree. I'd just like to clarify, when I was saying you can make a principled argument for voting for him, that's before the rape allegations came through. I think then you can't even make, and I wouldn't vote for him either way, but I don't think you can even make a principled argument then, because think about what you're saying to women that have been through, some of the things that Biden is accused of. Think about what you're, accepting, you're endorsing. Or think about the kind of behavior that you're endorsing when you vote for someone like that, even just, without all the policy, even if some of the stuff that he talked about was progressive or whatever. Think about what you're endorsing when you say, yes, I'm willing to have the most powerful man in the world be a rapist and potential paedophile. Again, as in, we already have that. But
I think it'd be a good point to just start out clarifying what the allegations are. So someone, Tara Reid, has said that when they were working in Joe Biden's office, I won't go into detail, but essentially she said that Joe Biden sexually assaulted her. And then what has come out recently in the news is that people at the time, her friends and her family, they've said to the press recently, yeah, these are allegations that she told us about at the time, but she didn't come forward with them at the time. And she didn't come forward with them at the time for the same reason that plenty of people don't come forward with sexual assault allegations, because it's a terrifying experience. And when you're up against someone who's in politics, who's part of the establishment, you're not going to get any justice for it. It's something that we see time and time again. People don't get justice when they come out with these sexual assault allegations against people who are in established positions of power. And railing on the media is really something that's becoming a favorite of this podcast. But if you look at the media's response to the sexual assault allegations, a lot of recent articles on it have been broadly along the lines of, oh, we don't have all the evidence, it probably didn't happen. And it's just sickening, because these are the same media outlets that for the past 4 years have, rightly so, slammed Trump for his sexual assault allegations. But when the rapist is wearing the color blue, it's suddenly acceptable.
That's the point, isn't it?
Believe some women.
Yeah, it's when it's Brett Kavanaugh or it's Donald Trump, it's believe a woman. But when it's antithetical to your political beliefs or the campaign you're trying to support, it's the exact opposite. It's like I say, it's performative resistance. It's performative bloody politics. It's performative opposition. These people don't believe in anything. It goes back to the argument we've had throughout the whole series, that it's just a game to some of these people. They don't actually care about the people involved. They don't care about the actual effect it's had on their lives. They just care about winning.
Sorry, for clarifying allegations, when I say he's a paedophile, and I stand by that, I'm referring to the fact that he kisses his granddaughter on the lips in public. He sniffs. There's tons of videos of him sniffing little girls' hair.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
He's like loads of stuff like that, and just like touching them inappropriately. Like
these allegations.
Fucking sue me, Biden. You pedo.
Red in the Face 3, the libel episode.
These allegations come on top of a series of worrying incidents and events that have happened in public with, like you say, women and young girls as well. And it's just been, it was awful to, like when you watched it. I mean, I was one of those people that when I was getting into politics that sort of saw Obama as this like good thing, not realizing that the policies he were doing are pretty horrific. Massive mouth. And I used to love those like bromance videos between Biden and Obama. You know, those that were like with Bezzy mates. When I was like first getting into
cringe.
When I was first getting into politics, I thought, oh, what a lovely relationship. And then the first time I saw one of those Biden videos, it's like, why is he touching that person like that? And it's like, it's all that behavior. And then when you hear these allegations, it's like, well, that's what he was doing in plain sight, was like touching people really weirdly in the Oval Office. But yeah, I think like completely echo what James said, and completely echo what Harley said, that it's this idea that there's good and evil, and because Biden has been decided that he's the good guy against evil Trump, therefore these allegations are just, they have to be pushed to the wayside because good must win.
Man bad.
Where there's
Lord Voldemort.
Where there's a hell of a lot more nuance between that. But yeah, he's just not a nice bloke. And
well, I mean, I don't think you can really understand politics unless you've read Harry Potter 3: The Prisoner of Azkaban, because Biden is totally a Sirius Black. And Trump, the Orange Man, is definitely Lord Voldemort. There's definitely something to be said about liberals in America, like middle of the road, free market, but economically conservative but socially liberal people who just absolutely adore Harry Potter. You know, they've never read another book, and it suddenly applies to literally everything. Everyone they don't like is a Slytherin, and everyone they do like is Gryffindor, and debt and poverty is the basilisk that only Harry's bloody. It's not even UBI, is it? It's like, I don't know. tax cuts to the rich are the snake's tooth that will stab the basilisk. Yeah, Sure Start is the tooth that will kill fucking Tom Riddle. Yeah, the Horcrux, whatever his fucking name is. Yeah.
Oh man, we've got to do an episode on that.
For someone who's really slagging off Harry Potter, you seem to get all the references there, James. Right? Literally.
I also look quite like him as well.
Before
know thine enemy.
Before this turns into the Chamber of Secrets read along, to pull it harshly back to Biden, I just think in terms of like talking about the idea of his presidency and nothing changing, look at the people that are backing him straight away. Like Biden had 94 billionaire backers, or 94 billionaires and their spouses that donated to the Biden campaign, and that's in comparison to obviously Bernie having no billionaires and the average donation being $27. Like that's if you're talking about the differences between, there's no difference between Biden and Trump. The difference between Biden and Bernie is big by the people that are backing them. And those interests will find themselves in the White House. There's a reason billionaires put their money into these people, because they want those interests to be, to be there when that person gets into power.
Yeah, and one reason not to vote for him is to show them that, the American left, as it is now, is not going to accept that if you fuck over our candidate, if you, use these dodgy tactics to make sure Bernie can't win, then we're not going to then turn around and say, oh no, don't worry, we'll still get you into the Oval Office. You got to show them that, no, you have to accept some of our program, at least some of our program, if you're going to, if you want us to vote for you.
I think ultimately, for me at least, one of the things that I'm dreading the most come November when Trump beats Biden, and I say when, and we're going to look like fucking idiots if we've got this wrong, right? But when Trump beats Biden, is that people who are just simping for the Democrats, they're going to turn around and say, this is Bernie Sanders' fault. This is the fault of left-wing radicals who want to change America.
For not getting involved.
Exactly. They're going to fucking pin the blame on people to the left of Biden, rather than accepting that Biden and the people that he represents are the fundamental issue, and people do not want that.
I've seen that as an argument made that you should vote for Biden as well. If you don't, then the media will go at the left and the left will get blamed for the defeat. But it's like, he's gonna fucking lose anyway.
And also,
they're gonna blame. They're gonna blame
anyway.
Yeah, they're gonna exactly.
And also, they voted for
Clinton.
Clinton.
Get blamed no matter what.
The left, Bernie backed Clinton. A lot of the left, the people that voted voted Clinton, and it's a complete false prophecy that Bernie lost Clinton the election because they needed someone to blame. That wasn't the fact that they have a completely outdated model of politics that doesn't appeal to fucking anybody. You got Nancy Pelosi, the most famous Democrat in America, with what was it, like
£30,000 fucking
30 grand's worth of
15 grand's worth of ice cream.
15 grand's worth of ice cream. She doesn't speak for anybody in America other than the super rich, and that's the issue, is that these liberal Democrats who see Clinton as their queen and Pelosi as their queen. Pelosi was happy to go on telly and boast about having 15 grand's worth of ice cream in a fucking freezer. Like, these are the sort of people that, unless we start pulling our support away and saying, no, that's not acceptable, they're not going to listen. They're just going to keep taking you for granted.
And the sick
it was while people were starving as well.
The sick thing is Hillary's actually a better candidate as well, not based on policy. The policy is like indistinguishable, but based on just she's better at running.
Being able to finish sentences, you mean?
Yes, exactly. That's what I mean. Better at that is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Not shitting herself on stage.
Exactly. She's better at actually running for office, and she couldn't do it. So look at fucking, as in, she could string a sentence together. She was an established politician. She had a lot more respect on her name than Biden does, and she lost to Trump. So imagine, like, he managed to shit all over her, and she's one of the most, she's a household name in American politics. Imagine what's going to happen to Biden when Trump starts calling him a fucking rapist and all this.
The Trump campaign ads already on Biden have been absolutely exceptional. Like I was talking about the incident with Nancy Pelosi. I think it might be on James Corden's show where she's going through like a 15 grand fridge. Trump is literally showing pictures of people starving, and then Nancy Pelosi talking about blocking a bill to help the coronavirus, like the response coronavirus financial response, her blocking it, and then another cuts to her talking about her 15 grand ice cream in her fridge. Like, he's already building this narrative, and he's just going to absolutely wipe the floor with Joe Biden. I also think as well that the thing is with Trump, why he's a very specific, very unique politician, is that I can see him turning around and actually advocating a form of universal healthcare, because he will just want to win, and he's a sort of self-funded campaign guy as well for a large part. I can see him doing something as wild as that because he knows it's popular. He'll just do it, whereas Biden will fundamentally, he just won't do it because he just doesn't believe in it.
He's going to reverse term limits as well, and we'll have like another 25 years of Trump.
This leads us to another point that is actually, do the Democrats even want to win? Because, like, for them, really, for the Democratic establishment, it makes no difference. No sort of no material difference whether Trump or Biden wins. That's why they work so hard to make sure Bernie didn't get the nomination, even though he was ahead in most polls against Trump, and make sure in his place Biden won, who was behind in most polls, and that everyone knows he's going to get absolutely fucked. They're much more willing to get this senile rapist, paedophile, whatever you want to call him, as the Democratic nominee than they were to have Bernie, and they know that he's going to get fucked because they don't care. Like, fucking Pelosi's got 15, 20 grand worth of ice cream in the fridge. What the fuck difference does it make to her whether Trump or Biden wins? She can just go back to a fucking mint choc chip. It doesn't matter to her. Do you know what I mean? This is a problem.
I genuinely think the only reason Biden wants to fucking win is that he wants to jerk off in the White House. I'm pretty sure he'd be happy with a replica, but it doesn't quite satisfy the real thing. Like, the dude wants to get off in the White House. He's seen what Clinton did, and he wants to go there. He wants to go to those extremes. He wants to fucking bust a nut in the Oval Office.
I was going to say he wouldn't be the first Democrat to do that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That probably is what he wants.
Red in the face, political news.
the sick fuck. But I mean, what I was talking about just then about the fact that it doesn't make a difference to any of these establishment figures whether Biden or Trump win, and that's why the Democratic Party essentially is so doomed, because it kind of goes back to what we were talking about the connection with working class communities, and how Labour has that at least, like throughout its history, at least it's had some connection to the unions, and the Democratic Party never has. So the people that represent it in Congress, whether they think themselves, or Congress or in the presidency or whatever, whether they think themselves progressive or not, it doesn't matter, because they've got no skin in the game. There's no reason. There's no.
It's why Michael Bloomberg ran, right?
What?
Right.
Yeah, he's a fucking billionaire. Yeah, exactly.
A billionaire former Republican candidate.
Yeah.
Which he might have been even a Republican mayor of New York. Potentially might have got that wrong.
So they need some. Basically, the point I was making is they need some working class people in there, don't they? Like, but you can say what you want about AOC. I know some people doubt her credentials as a leftist. I don't know much about the details, to be honest. But she's, as far as I know, she's from a fairly working class background. At least she's there. She has some connection to the community that she represents. Whether she's a perfect socialist or anything, I don't know. But that's much more important than having a load of people who have thousands of pounds worth of ice cream in their fridge. Do you know what I mean?
True, very true. I don't know if it's a way of rounding up a very serious discussion with. I mean, the main problem a lot of people have had with Joe Biden is the fact that we just said his complete inability to finish sentences. The fact that he's not going to win based off the fact that how old is he? Is he 77? 77. 77 knocking on 95.
In human years, yeah, but in demon years, he's like
in reptile years.
What's everyone's sort of favourite moment of the Biden campaign so far in terms of his complete inability just to coherently put anything together?
Fucking Cornpop, 100% Cornpop.
Do you want to explain Cornpop a little bit? Can you remember the story about Cornpop?
I can't remember it all exactly, but I mean, it's part of his series in strange things he's called people. Like he speaks like a fucking mafia guy in the 20s. Okay, so he enters sentences like, "Oh, sure, why don't you go over there, fat?" Or "Why don't you go over there, Mickey?" and shit like that. Like he has weird suffixes for people.
It's him he's trying to show his like working class credentials, and it's always fucking horrific.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if you're a welder in like Algonquin in like 1925, fine, you might vote for him. But
the Cornpop one though is
the Cornpop
was actually part of his African American outreach as well. That's why it's so funny, because he was like, when he was talking about how he knew about the African American community because he used to work in a local pool that had some black kids in it, but there were some bad kids that had a bad crew, and like one of the bad kids was called Cornpop. And it's just, seriously, James, please edit this quote into next, so they could just show it to go search Cornpop, because it's amazing. They actually found his obituary, by the way. They found Cornpop's obituary. It's
rest in peace.
He's an actual person, apparently.
Actual guy, yeah.
Go on, Holly. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to share the Cornpop story. He kicks Cornpop out of a swimming pool because Joe Biden used to be a lifeguard, and I think we mentioned this earlier about how kids would come and stroke his leg and look at the blonde hairs.
He kicks, weird.
It's extremely weird.
Sorry.
But so Cornpop is misbehaving on a diving board. So he's like, "You got to get off that diving board, and I'll come and take you off," or something along those lines. And then he kicks Cornpop out of the pool, and then Cornpop and some other guys are out.
By the way, he's saying this at a campaign rally. He's saying this in front of people out loud. It's awful.
It's literally like you're sat with an old man in a care home, and he's just reminiscing about the strange stories of his life. And I've worked in a care home, and honestly, I got the exact same vibes. Anyway, he apologized to Cornpop. That's basically how the story ends. He says, I'm not sorry for kicking you out, but I'm sorry for what I said." And then Cornpop is like, "All right." And he puts the straight razor away, and Joe Biden says, "And my heart started beating again."
Twitter,
it's so fucking surreal.
when it was talking about what does Cornpop look like, the best one I saw was like someone put a picture of the snakes from Fallout 3 in the vault and being like, this is what Cornpop looks like.
Red in the face says tunnel snakes rule.
My favourite Biden moment, I think, was when he was trying. Do you remember when he was trying to recite the Declaration of Independence? And he goes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women are created by you know the thing." Just left it
This
there in front of thousands of people.
We gotta edit this in, but James, can you do us a favour and edit in the one where he says, we've never let our democracy take second fiddle from now until the flu of 1718. We've never let our democracy take second fiddle, and there's a way we can hold the election and correct the public health. And it's fucking incoherent, and I don't understand how people are going to vote for this man.
He mixed up Hurricane Katrina and the Sandy Hook massacre. He was vice president during the Sandy Hook massacre.
Well, they were both bad.
How? Yeah, but I mean, how?
The best one, I mean, my personal favourite. Personal favourite by far, from the man that will win the majority of the votes of the African American community in America, his quote of, "Poor kids are just as bright and just as intelligent as white kids."
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
Cornpop was a bad dude, and he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did, and back in those days, to show how things have changed, one of the things you had to use, if you used pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap. And so he was up on the board, wouldn't listen to me. I said, "Hey, Esther, you, off the board, or I'll come up and drag you off." Well, he came off, and he said, "I'll meet you outside my car." He said, "I'll be waiting for you." He was waiting for 3 guys in straight razors. Not a joke. There was a guy named Bill Wright, Mouse, the only white guy, and he did all the pulls. And I said, "What am I going to do?" He said, "Come down here in the basement where mechanics, where all the pool filter is. You know the chain? There used to be a chain that went across the deep end. And he cut off a 6-foot length of chain. He folded up. He said, "You walk out with that chain. And you walk to the car and say, 'You may cut me, man, but I'm going to wrap this chain around your head.'" So I walked out with the chain. And I walked up to my car. And they had, those days, you used to remember the straight razor. You'd bang them on the curb, get them rusty, put them in the rain barrel, get them rusty. And I looked at him, but I was smart then. I said, "First of all," I said, "when I tell you get off the board, you get off the board, and I'll kick you out again, but I shouldn't have called you Esther Williams. I apologize for that. I apologize, but I didn't know that apology was going to work." He said, "You apologize to me?" I said, "I apologize for that, not for throwing you out, but I apologize for what I said." He said, "Okay," closed the straight razor, and my heart began to beat again.